Hello, my name is Rebecca, and I'm 70 years old. I live in a peaceful neighborhood on the edge of Portland, Oregon. The trees outside my window are turning golden, a quiet reminder that autumn has arrived once again. This season always brings a rush of memories, but today, one in particular has returned, one that changed the course of my life forever. I was sitting on the couch in my sunlit living room when I looked out the window and saw my granddaughter, Ava, playing in the garden. She's 10 years old, full of questions, and carries a spark in her eyes that often reminds me of a much younger version of myself. "Grandma," she called, running up to the porch steps. "Were you always this calm and serious, even when you were little?" Her question made me laugh softly. I reached out to wipe the sweat from her forehead and said, "Do you want to hear a story? One from a time when I was about your age." Ava sat beside me without hesitation, her face glowing with excitement. "Yes. I want to know what you were like," she said eagerly. I looked out at the fading sunlight brushing against the garden flowers and took a deep breath. "This story isn't just about me," I began. "It's about family, about love, betrayal, choices, and what it really means to stay true to yourself, even when no one else does." Ava listened silently, her wide eyes locked on mine. I smiled, though a part of my heart tightened. It all started many, many years ago, back when I was 31. When I was 31, I was living in a quiet apartment on the Upper East Side of Portland. The city was alive with noise, ambition, and late-night lights, but my life felt like the opposite: organized, quiet, and disciplined. I had recently earned recognition as a rising attorney in a small but respected law firm. I worked hard, kept to myself, and believed that if I just kept doing everything right, someday I'd be seen, appreciated, maybe even loved a little more. But love and appreciation were rare things in the house I grew up in. My mother, Brenda, never truly looked at me the way she looked at my younger sister, Jessica. Jessica was 5 years younger than me, loud, spontaneous, and, in my mother's eyes, flawless. She bounced from job to job, showed up at family dinners with a new boyfriend every few months, and always had an excuse ready for why her rent was overdue. Still, my mother adored her. To Brenda, Jessica could do no wrong. And, to me, well, I was the quiet one, the difficult one, the one who didn't smile enough or flirt with the right men at parties. My father, Robert, was different. He was a retired history professor, gentle, observant, and kind. He never said much, but when he looked at me, I felt seen. He noticed the little things: how I stayed late to help with dishes, how I asked questions about his favorite books, how I remembered what he liked in his coffee. It wasn't dramatic love, but it was steady. It kept me going. I still remember one autumn evening when we were all seated for dinner. My mother had gone out of her way to set up a fancy outdoor meal in the backyard. The Central Park-style leaves were glowing, and Brenda was glowing too, eager to share some news. "Rebecca," she said, setting her fork down delicately, "you'll come to the Andersons' garden party next month, won't you? The Whitemans and Rockfords will be there too. A perfect chance to meet someone important." I glanced up from my plate and quietly said, "I have a deadline that week. A pretty big case." Brenda's face dropped. "That's a shame. Jessica will be there. She might finally meet someone from the Rockefeller family." Jessica giggled. "Come on, Rebecca, you can't work forever. No man wants a woman who's always buried in paperwork." I didn't argue. I didn't roll my eyes. I just started clearing the plates. Only one person looked at me with a soft smile that night: my father. And, in that moment, I clung to it. The next morning, I went for a walk with my father. It had become our quiet tradition. No matter how busy life got, we would take a stroll through the neighborhood park every Saturday. That day, the wind had a slight chill, and the leaves crunched beneath our feet. We didn't talk much at first, just walked in silence. Then I stopped, unsure of how to put my feelings into words. "Dad," I said softly, "sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. I work, I stay out of trouble, I try to help, but no matter what I do, Mom and Jessica make me feel like I'm not enough." My father paused, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. "Rebecca," he said, "you are more than enough. You're steady, thoughtful, and strong. Your mother and sister have different values. They see the world differently. But you must walk the path that feels right to you, even if they don't understand it. I blinked back unexpected tears. It's just hard sometimes. I feel so alone in this family. He smiled softly, his eyes full of quiet wisdom. Life is long. Sometimes we start out feeling like strangers in our own homes. But the choices you make today will shape the home you build tomorrow. And one day, they might see you more clearly than they do now. His words settled deep in my heart. From that day on, I focused even harder on my career. I stopped waiting for praise. I gave up trying to win my mother's affection or chase my sister's approval. I just worked. I represented clients no one else wanted. I stayed late. I studied case law like my life depended on it. Slowly, my reputation began to grow. Judges began to remember my name. Clients asked for me by request. And deep down, I hoped that maybe, just maybe, my family might finally see me too. But they didn't. Brenda became more cold, more dismissive. She complained that I missed too many family events. Jessica mocked my quiet lifestyle, once saying, "You're going to end up rich, alone, and with no one to call on your birthday." I smiled and let it pass, but it stung more than I admitted. Then, in the spring of that year, everything changed. My father had just finished trimming the rose bushes in the backyard when he slipped near the porch stairs. He called out for help, but no one was home. By the time he was found, he had already injured his lower back. The fall looked minor, but after being rushed to the hospital, the doctors discovered something far more serious. We found a mass in his pancreas. The doctor told us grimly, "It's already progressed to a late stage." The words hit me like a tidal wave. Pancreatic cancer. My father, the only person who had ever truly stood by me, was dying. And nothing, not my education, not my success, not even the years I spent doing everything right, could change that. From the moment we learned about the cancer, I rearranged my entire life. I spoke with my firm and requested a temporary leave. My bosses, thankfully, were understanding. They knew how much I valued my work, but they also saw the pain in my eyes. I packed a small bag and moved into my parents' house, not because it was comfortable, but because it was necessary. My father needed someone, and I wasn't going to let him face this alone. Jessica visited once in a while, dropping by with store-bought flowers and hurried excuses. "I have a conference," she'd say. "I'll come next week." She never stayed more than 20 minutes. Brenda, on the other hand, reacted in her usual way, cold, resentful, and bothered. "He should have been more careful," she muttered once. "He always tries to do everything himself." I kept quiet, choosing to focus on my father instead. I was there for his appointments, his chemotherapy sessions, his pain medication schedule. I changed bedsheets, helped him to the bathroom, fed him soup spoon by spoon when he didn't have the strength to lift his hand. Every night, I sat by his bed with a book in my lap, pretending to read, even though I was just watching him breathe. There were nights he'd wake up coughing, and I'd be there with water before he could even call out. Through all of this, the house remained emotionally cold, Jessica too busy to care, and Brenda treating my father's condition like an inconvenience. There was no warmth, no shared grief. Just silence, tension, and avoidance. But in those final weeks, my bond with my father deepened in a way I'll never forget. One night, he turned his head toward me slowly and whispered, "Rebecca?" "Yes, Dad," I said, leaning closer. He gave a faint smile. "I want you to know something. I changed my will." I blinked. "What?" "I asked the lawyer to come last week, when no one else was here. It's done. Everything I own, every dollar, the house, my savings, it's all yours." "Dad, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted softly. "Because when it mattered, you were here. Not for money, not for show, but because you love me. And I want to honor that. You've been my greatest pride." Tears welled in my eyes as I held his hand. "Thank you, but I didn't do this for anything in return." "I know," he said, his voice frail. "That's exactly why you deserve it." He closed his eyes and slept peacefully that night. And a week later, with me holding his hand, he passed away. Just like that, the only person who truly saw me was gone. The morning of the will reading felt heavy, like a thunderstorm just waiting to break. We gathered in the office of my father's longtime attorney, Mr. Callahan, a stern but fair man who had handled all of Robert's affairs for over 2 decades. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers being shuffled and the slow clicking of Jessica's high heels as she paced impatiently. Brenda sat with a thin, smug smile on her face. "Let's just get this over with," she said, crossing her legs. "Robert always told me we'd be taken care of." I sat silently, my palms cold and still in my lap. I already knew what the will contained, but I didn't know how they'd react, or how ugly things were about to get. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat and began. As per the final, legally updated will of Mr. Robert McKinley, dated 3 weeks prior to his death, all financial assets, real estate, investment accounts, and personal property, totaling an estimated $2.4 million, are to be inherited solely by his daughter, Rebecca McKinley. The room fell into dead silence. Jessica's mouth dropped open. Brenda's face drained of color. "What the hell are you talking about?" she snapped. "That must be a mistake. Robert would never do that." "I assure you," Mr. Callahan replied calmly, sliding the document across the desk, "these papers are properly signed and notarized. He made this decision willingly and with full legal capacity." Jessica leaned over the document, scanning it frantically. No, this isn't right.
He was weak.
He was on medication. He wasn't in his right mind. Mr. Callahan remained firm. "Your father was lucid. He was in full command of his decisions. I met with him myself. He knew exactly what he wanted." Brenda's voice turned sharp. "This is your doing," she hissed, glaring at me. "You manipulated him while he was sick. You took advantage of him." My chest tightened, but I refused to look away. "I took care of him," I said quietly. "Every day, while you were out shopping and Jessica was nowhere to be found." Jessica stood up abruptly, her eyes filled with rage. "This isn't over," she said. "You'll regret this, Rebecca. You think you can take everything and just walk away." I stayed seated, calm on the outside, but trembling within. I had a feeling this storm had only just begun. The days that followed were tense, but I kept to myself, quietly managing the paperwork and preparing to move forward with settling the estate. I had no intention of gloating or rubbing it in. I simply wanted peace. But peace was not what Brenda and Jessica had in mind. 2 weeks after the will was read, I was alone at the house going through my father's personal files when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find both of them standing there, Brenda in a tight blazer and dark lipstick, Jessica holding a worn leather handbag and a face full of attitude. "We need to talk," Brenda said, pushing past me without waiting for an answer. Jessica followed, slamming the door behind her. "Where's the paperwork?" she demanded. "What paperwork?" I asked, trying to stay composed.
"The deed."
"The account info. The documents for the estate," Brenda barked. "We know you have them. Hand them over." My stomach tightened. "I'm not giving you anything. Dad made his decision. It's final. The will is legal, and everything has already been filed with the court." Jessica's face flushed red. "You think you're better than us? Just because you cleaned his sheets and fed him soup? That doesn't make you entitled to his whole life." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't ask for any of this. He chose to give it to me. Because I was there. Because I loved him." The air shifted suddenly, like the calm before a thunderclap. "You manipulative little snake," Brenda growled. "You don't deserve a cent of it." Before I could react, Jessica lunged forward and grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking it so hard I screamed. "Sign it over," she shouted. "Right now, or I swear I'll—" "Let go of me," I yelled, trying to push her away. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brenda reach for the crystal flower vase sitting on the nearby table, one my father had always loved. Without a second thought, she lifted it and smashed it against the side of my head. The impact was sharp, hot, and immediate. My knees buckled. I collapsed to the floor, dizzy and bleeding. The vase shattered into pieces beside me. "Stop!" I cried out, barely able to see through the tears. And then, through the blur, I heard a door open. Footsteps. A voice. Oh my God. What's going on in here? It was Emily, my next-door neighbor. She had let herself in after hearing the commotion through the open window. One look at me on the floor, clutching my head, and she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling 911, she shouted, backing toward the door. Jessica froze. Brenda's face went pale. Neither of them said a word. Minutes later, I heard sirens approaching. The flashing red and blue lights lit up the living room walls like warning flares. My vision was still foggy, my head pounding, but the relief I felt when the paramedics and officers burst through the front door was overwhelming. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" one of the paramedics asked, kneeling beside me as the other surveyed the room. I nodded weakly, unable to speak. Blood trickled down from the side of my scalp, soaking into my sweater. My hands trembled as I tried to hold a tissue to the wound. "She hit her with that," Emily said firmly, pointing to the shattered vase on the floor. I saw it with my own eyes. And her daughter was pulling her hair, screaming at her to sign over some documents. Officer Grant, a tall, composed man in his 40s, stepped forward. "Brenda McKinley, Jessica McKinley, you are both under arrest for assault, attempted fraud, and domestic battery."
Brenda tried to protest.
"This is all a misunderstanding. She's making this worse than it was." But the evidence was clear. The blood. The broken vase. My injured head. Emily's witness statement. The officers weren't listening anymore. Brenda and Jessica were handcuffed, read their rights, and let out of the house without another word. As the medics loaded me onto the stretcher, I caught Emily's eye and whispered, "Thank you." She nodded, her face full of concern. "You're going to be okay now." At the hospital, everything was a blur, bright lights, sterile air, and a deep, throbbing ache in my head. They moved me into a treatment room quickly, and soon after, a new doctor walked in. He looked to be in his mid-30s, calm and focused, with clear hazel eyes and a soothing voice. "Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Sullivan," he said gently, examining the injury on my scalp. "You've had quite a day." I tried to smile but couldn't. "You could say that." He began treating the wound with steady hands and surprising kindness. "You were lucky. The cut's not deep, but the trauma could have been worse. We'll monitor you for concussion symptoms." As he cleaned the blood and bandaged my head, I found myself relaxing slightly for the first time in days. "You don't deserve what happened to you," he said quietly. "The nurse told me what they did." I looked down, my voice barely audible. "They were my family." Eric paused, then said gently, "People who love you don't leave scars." Something about the way he said it, direct but not judgmental, touched something inside me. He didn't just see my injury. He saw the story behind it. Before he left the room, he turned to me. "If you're considering pressing charges, I think you should. People like that shouldn't get away with abuse." I stared at him, surprised. "You really think I have a case?" He nodded firmly. "More than that, I think you have a right to fight back. And if you need help, I can connect you with a legal advocate. You shouldn't go through this alone." I didn't know it then, but that moment was the start of something new, not just justice, but something far deeper. I spent the next few days recovering in the hospital, with regular visits from Dr. Eric. He wasn't just my physician anymore. He had become a quiet, steady presence. He always asked how I was feeling, brought tea from the cafe downstairs when the hospital coffee tasted like burnt rubber, and sat with me for a few extra minutes when the nights felt too long. There was no pressure in his presence, no pity, only calm support. And in that fragile state, it meant everything. At his encouragement, I agreed to move forward with pressing charges. Officer Grant connected me to a local legal advocate, and within days, my attorney filed a formal criminal case against both Brenda and Jessica. The charges included aggravated assault with a household object, attempted fraud and coercion, forgery related to inheritance documents, domestic violence. Emily agreed to testify as a witness. The paramedics provided medical reports. Eric gave a professional statement as my attending physician.
And
I told the truth, every last word of it. The courtroom felt colder than I expected on the day of the hearing. Brenda sat in her sharp, pressed blouse like nothing had happened, her arms folded. Jessica looked smug, like the whole thing was beneath her. But when my attorney began laying out the timeline, my father's care, his legal will, their attempt to override it with forged documents, and finally, the assault, both their expressions began to crack. Emily's voice was steady on the stand. I saw her bleeding on the floor. Jessica was screaming at her. Brenda picked up a vase and hit her. I was there. I saw it happen. The judge reviewed everything. The medical photos, the will, the fake documents Jessica had submitted the week after our father's death. Then he asked me to stand. I took a deep breath, looked both women in the eye, and said, "You weren't there when Dad needed you. I was. And he chose to leave me everything because he saw who I was, not because I asked for it, but because I earned it through love and loyalty. What you did wasn't just cruel, it was criminal." The room was silent. The judge's ruling came quickly. Brenda and Jessica were each sentenced to 10 years in state prison, with no early parole. They were also ordered to pay a combined restitution fine for damages, forged filings, and emotional distress. The courtroom doors closed behind them with a final echo that felt like closure. When I walked out of the courthouse, Eric was waiting outside.
"You did it," he said.
I smiled, the first real one in weeks.
"No."
"We did." He looked at me with those steady eyes and replied, "Let's get you home." The days following the trial felt strangely still. For the first time in what felt like years, I could sleep through the night without checking my phone for court updates or lawyer emails. The house, my father's house, was quiet but peaceful. I could almost hear his voice in the silence. I lit a candle in his memory every morning, and each time, I whispered the same words, "I hope I made you proud." Eric didn't disappear after the court case. In fact, he became a part of my everyday life. At first, he'd stop by with groceries or help with mail. Then it became coffee on the porch, long walks after dinner, and talking about things beyond the past, books, music, future dreams I hadn't dared to have before. One evening, we were sitting on the patio under a sky filled with stars. He reached across the table and took my hand. "You've been through hell," he said. "And yet, you're the most grounded person I've ever met. You didn't let it harden you. You let it shape you. That's rare." I looked into his eyes and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just safety. It was belonging. "I never thought I'd find someone who saw me," I whispered. "I see you, Rebecca," he replied. "I've seen you from the moment I stepped into that room. And I don't want to stop seeing you. Not ever." That's when he pulled out a small velvet box. Inside it was a simple, elegant ring, a soft gold band with a single diamond. "I know this may feel soon," he said. "But when you know, you know. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they were from joy. I nodded, unable to speak, and whispered, "Yes." We were married 6 months later in a quiet ceremony held in my father's backyard. Emily, the neighbor who had once saved my life, stood beside me as my witness. The vows were short, sincere, and perfect. When Eric said, "For better or worse," I felt my chest ache in the best possible way. Because I knew that I had already lived through the worst, and now, better was finally here. A few months into our marriage, something unexpected happened. I stood in the bathroom staring at a small test in disbelief. I was pregnant. We had planned to start a family eventually, but it happened sooner than expected. I was in my late 30s, and I worried it might not happen for us. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 9 months later, on a rainy spring morning, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. As I held him against my chest, Eric kissed my forehead and whispered, "He's going to grow up knowing what real strength looks like. Because his mother is the strongest woman I've ever known." We named him Robert, after the man who had taught me how to love, forgive, and fight for myself. Now, all these years later, I sit by the window of my cozy home, watching Ava, my 10-year-old granddaughter, chasing butterflies in the garden I planted with my own hands. That same garden once belonged to my father. It's changed over the decades, But some of the rose bushes are still the ones he trimmed himself. And somehow, through the seasons, they've always survived. Just like I did. Ava looks up and calls out, "Grandma, was it scary? When you stood up to them?" I pause before answering. Yes, it was. But sometimes doing the right thing is scary. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. She walks over, sits beside me, and leans her head on my shoulder. Did it ever get better? I smile.
It did.
It got much better. But not because everything became perfect. It got better because I stopped letting other people tell me what I deserved. Ava looks thoughtful. What happened to Jessica and Brenda? They served their time, I say gently. And life humbled them in ways I couldn't have imagined. I don't wish them pain, Ava. But I also don't forget what they did. She looks up at me. Did you forgive them? I look out at the garden, the sunlight painting golden streaks across the grass. I forgave for my own peace. But I also built boundaries they could never cross again. Just then, Eric walks out onto the porch, now silver at the temples, but still the calm, strong man who held my hand through the storm. Our son, young Robert, now grown, follows behind him, carrying a tray of lemonade. Everything okay out here? Eric asks, smiling. Better than okay, I say, taking his hand. Ava giggles and runs toward her grandfather, wrapping her arms around his waist. Grandpa, did you know Grandma used to be a lawyer and a fighter? He winks at her. Still is. She just fights in different ways now. I laugh quietly and look around at the life we've built. Imperfect, beautiful, earned. Then I look down at Ava and say, no matter what happens in life, I want you to remember something. Love people. But don't let anyone make you feel small. Your voice, your heart, your worth, those are not up for negotiation. Ava nods slowly, her young face full of understanding beyond her years. And as the breeze rustles through the flowers, I feel my father with me, in the warmth, in the peace, in the roots of the home he left behind. Thank you, Dad, I whisper silently. Your final gift gave me a second chance. And with that, my story, our story, comes to rest not in bitterness, but in bloom. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart or made you think, please like the video, leave a comment, and consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means everything and helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life.